You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 103. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm delighted to have you join me here this week for my conversation with Erin O'Rourke and Piper Riley Thompson. Erin and Piper are lawyers and the creators of the Off the Tracks podcast. If you have not checked out that podcast, I highly encourage you to do so. They interview lawyers and explore what it means to go off the tracks. In today's episode, we talk about all things, including going off the tracks. We talk about creating a solo practice. We talk about entrepreneurship and the law. We talk about what it's like to stop practicing law. And for all of you who have joined us here today, I know you are going to absolutely love this conversation. You're going to be inspired. You're going to love Erin and Piper. And I'm just so thrilled to bring this conversation to you. So without further ado, I turn it over to the recording of our conversation, and thank you for joining us. I look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm so excited to be introducing you to two very special guests who are joining us here this week. They have a podcast of their own. If you have not yet listened to it, I highly encourage you to check it out. It is called Off the Tracks. Yes, it is a podcast for lawyers, and it talks about all sorts of different ways that lawyers can practice or not practice. It is an award-winning podcast. It was recognized by the Canadian Law Blog Award for Best Podcast. And they talk about all sorts of wonderful topics. They have a recent series about going in-house. They've talked about niching down, solo practice, transitions from the US to Canada, diversity, wellness, all of the things. And so if you haven't guessed who I have with me today, I will make the announcement. I have Erin O'Rourke and Piper Riley Thompson, and I'm going to introduce Erin first. Erin, you are a solo practitioner in Halifax, and I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the practice that you have currently.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're so excited to be on the other side of the interview microphone through Zoom, and we are so excited to be here with you. But yeah, to quickly, summarize where my practice has been for almost 3 years now, which is truly mind-boggling. It feels like I just graduated the other day. But I started my own firm shortly after I finished articling and was called to the bar in June of 2020. And I started my fully remote law firm sort of in the midst of the pandemic in July of 2020. At that time, I did a few different areas of law, things that I had done at the legal clinic at Windsor and things that I felt comfortable in. And since then, I've really tried to hone in on focusing on employment and immigration law, which are my, two areas of law that I'm most passionate about. And so I do a lot of work with immigration detention reviews and refugees, and most recently working with the Pro Bono Ontario Workplace Sexual Harassment Hotline. So it's been a really amazing experience getting to just tailor the way I practice law and running my own firm virtually. As you said, I live in Halifax, but all my clients are back in Ontario, and it's just been such a neat experience getting to weave through that. And of course, getting to do the podcast with Piper has been such a pleasure and really kept us connected to the legal profession when we joined in such a weird time where everything was virtual and there weren't many opportunities to meet others in the profession. We've just been so blessed to meet others like yourself. So yeah, that's a bit more about me.
Thank you so much, Erin. And I'm really excited for this podcast episode in particular. I'm excited to hear more about your story, about I mean, what it was like to become qualified as a lawyer in the middle of a pandemic. It just seems so surreal for someone like me, who's kind of a dinosaur, who got called before people were even using BlackBerries, frankly. So really excited to talk about that. And I know a lot of listeners to this podcast are very interested in the stories of lawyers who take a different approach, who, for example, go and found their own law firm. So really interested in learning more about that. And of course, your own experience along with Piper in creating the podcast that the two of you have. So excited to have you. Welcome, and can't wait to dive in more during today's discussion. Piper, over to you. You, I understand, recently retired your license to practice law, and you're currently working as a senior career advisor for law students at the University of Calgary Faculty of Law. So welcome to the podcast. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you?
Thank you. Yes. So Erin and I met at the University of Windsor Faculty of Law, and never in a million years did I think we'd be doing what I don't want to speak for Erin, but I don't think either of us thought that our lives would look the way that they look now. We both got called to the bar in 2020. So we're almost at that 3 official year mark of post call. And I think Erin and I have really explored as people and on our podcast what it means to go off the tracks. And we couldn't be more excited to be here sharing some of those stories with you today. I took my career off the tracks when I did retire my license in September 2022. I had been practicing in my hometown of Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I worked at a First Nations health entity doing human rights and Indigenous law. And that was a really valuable experience. And it was the type of work that I thought I always wanted to do. But I still felt like I was being called to do something else. And that had been a really long-standing feeling. And I was actively trying to seek out ways to retire my license so that I could really explore that, sort of like scratch that itch. And I was already doing that in my business, which I'll talk about in a second. But yes, so I am the senior career advisor at the University of Calgary Faculty of Law, and that's the type of work I had dreamed about doing, if I'm being completely honest, since I was in law school. I now can speak really freely about how my sort of thoughts on this have evolved, but I really knew that practice was not for me. And I joke and I say like 2 or 3 days into law school. And so being able to do this work now, I've never felt more like I'm on the right path and in the right place. And I feel really grateful. And at the same time, I run a business called Ontario Bar Exam Coach, and that business stemmed from failing both bar exams in Ontario and eventually, obviously, passing them. And I started the business by working solely with one-on-one clients and doing strategic coaching for them to help them learn how to approach the bar exams. And now I almost solely work with students through my signature course and group coaching program, Bar Exam Bootcamp, which runs 3 times a year. I do take on a very limited number of one-on-one clients, but most people work with me through Bar Exam Bootcamp. And most recently, I am for the inaugural graduating class at Lincoln Alexander School of Law at Toronto Metropolitan University. I am the in-house bar prep person. So I've been running workshops for their graduating class, which honestly feels like a dream come true, because 2 years ago, I reached out to every Ontario law school to submit a proposal to do this work, and nobody was interested. And so when TMU reached out to me, it was like a pinch me moment. I think I maybe sent Erin a voice note screaming, or maybe I just called her screaming. I was so excited. So yeah, that's me. And I couldn't be more grateful to be here. And I think that something about going off the tracks that I've learned and that I experience every day is it's so rewarding, but it's also really scary when you go into the unknowns. And so right now I'm living in this excitement and this gratitude, but also with the fearful excitement of what might come next.
Love it. Thank you so much, Piper. And just like I think there are listeners who are really going to relate to Erin's story about going solo, I think a lot of listeners are going to relate to your story about grappling with that question of, do I continue to practice law? Is there something else that is calling to me? Your story of entrepreneurialism, which we're so excited to dive into more in today's podcast. All of it is so interesting. And again, so delighted to have you here today with Erin to talk about each of your respective paths and how you have, in your unique ways, gone off the tracks. So thank you. Erin, question for you. You talked about going and starting your own practice. And what I'd love to know is what inspired you to start your own practice, and what advice you would give to lawyers who are thinking about going solo or who are at the early stages of it.
Yeah, it was sort of born out of a necessity more than a lifelong dream. In law school, I had never really thought about going solo. I didn't even really know that a lot of people did go solo, but since doing it myself, I've realized that a lot of people do it. And it's a very common path to take in law, but it really isn't discussed much in law school. And it's kind of seen as like a scary thing to do. The law society audits are going to be scary, and the accounting and the trust accounting, and it's just too much headache to figure out. So it's often sort of shied away from, but I've absolutely loved it the past 3 years. Of course, there's hardships. It's not, all rainbows and sunshines, but I think, any area of law that you're practicing in or any sort of organization that you're going to be working in, there's going to be the challenges and the highlights in each of those areas. And for me, I've really liked the unique challenges of solo practice, at least for the first couple of years of practice. So because I was called during the pandemic and hireback was not a thing. I mean, when we were called to the bar, they were terminating their associates at firms, right? Like the associates didn't have jobs. There's no way they were going to be calling us back to the office. It was truly just sort of a very unsettling time. And I remember just turning to people around me saying, what am I going to do? I have student loan payments due next month. Like those don't stop just because I don't have a job. And what would it take to start my own law firm while I figure out this next step, or not even necessarily start my own law firm, but provide services until I can find something else. And so my goal at that time was just sort of to make it to the fall. That's what I had said was, just try to make it to the fall. Everyone was saying maybe hireback will be bigger then, or they might call people back to the office by the fall. So I just sort of tried to do it as best I could and figure out how I could do it as leanly as possible. And now it's been almost 3 years. So it definitely made it past the fall. But I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got was start how you mean to go on. And it's really scary to do that because you're starting and you're like, I have no clients. Like there are some people that go out after they've already been practicing for a while. And yes, they may have some clients that follow them. But I was a fresh lawyer with no prospects of people to do employment and immigration. I had tons of people asking me to do wills, but I had no sweet clue how to do a will. So the thing I did was try to build my firm the way that I wanted it to be, even when I had like no clients. And I think that really helped me when I started to get clients, because now, I mean, I couldn't take on new clients for the whole month of April because I was so busy. But if you had told that to me back in June of 2020, I would have laughed and said, like, where are these people going to come from? But if I didn't have the processes in place that I had spent that early time building, then I would be scrambling as soon as I started to get clients. So I think that's probably the best advice that I got was start as you mean to go on, put those processes in place. And the other big thing that I did is there's a lot of services that you may want to get. And it may be marginally cheaper, or you may save like 10% to do like a year-long contract with a service provider for X, Y, and Z. But I did everything on a monthly basis. And that was so helpful because it just, gave me the clarity and peace of mind that I only needed to cover expenses for a month at a time instead of feeling very overwhelmed that I needed to generate enough revenue to cover my expenses for each month. And I think that that really helped, especially when you're at the very, very beginning and you don't have anyone helping out or paying at that time. So those are probably my biggest tips or advice right now.
It's amazing, Erin, and such a big accomplishment and something that I find so impressive. I have more questions in a moment, but one question comes to mind is, how did you generate clients? Because I know that's a concern for a lot of lawyers who are considering going up on their own.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of hours that went unpaid at the beginning. And at first you kind of feel like, okay, what am I doing? But it eventually all pays off. Even though you might get discouraged and you say, okay, I'm only getting referrals for people that want wills and real estate, and I don't do any of that. I'm not about to dabble. Using that as an opportunity to then find a lawyer, build a relationship with that lawyer and say, here, I have a client. This is my friend. They want someone to help them with a will or a real estate transaction. And I don't do it, but I heard that you can. Can you take care of this client? And then if you start, building those referral relationships, eventually it starts flowing back to you too. Because then they ask, oh, okay, so what do you do then? If you don't do wills and estates, and if you don't do real estate, then what do you do? What kind of files are you willing to take on? And so that really helped. And I did a lot of like Law Society referral service at the beginning, where you do a 30-minute free consultation and then potentially provide services. And that really helped get my feet wet, got me talking to people, got me used to providing consultations to clients, and really got me exposed to a lot of areas of law quickly. And then just organically over the past couple of years, I've just really worked on networking and making it known that these are the types of areas of law that I really enjoy. And now I do a lot of legal aid work through Legal Aid Ontario and get a lot of referrals from the clinics when they have a lot of overflow work. So it's just been a slow process for sure. It didn't happen on day one or even within the first year necessarily. It has just slowly grown. But yeah, it's an interesting question because it's definitely scary when you're opening shop, and even if it's a virtual lean firm, it is a little daunting to say, okay, so where is my first client going to come from?
Beautiful. It's so helpful, Erin. And I think for anyone who is listening, and whether it's someone who is looking to start their own firm or they're in a firm, but they're wanting to build their practice, I think what you're explaining is so helpful for demystifying this notion of the overnight success, right? It takes time. It takes doing some free work. It takes building your relationships. It takes persistence. The question that I have, and then I'm going to turn it over to Piper, because I am imagining someone thinking, well, how long does that take, right? How long until? And so are you able to pinpoint, recognizing that it's going to be different for everybody, but are you able to pinpoint almost that inflection point where it went from, okay, you're really struggling to find people. And sorry, maybe you weren't struggling. I'm just putting my own words in here, but it's challenging to find clients to that point where you're, okay, now I know that this is working. Now I'm at the point where I'm turning clients away because I don't have capacity, or you're building capacity, or however you want to describe that. Sorry, again, I'm putting words into your mouth, but are you able to pinpoint roughly when that inflection point was?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was probably about a year in. And again, of course, it's going to be different for everyone. I know people who started after me that probably hit that point way faster. And maybe they have better business acumen, because I am definitely not the best businesswoman. Definitely made a lot of business mistakes along the way. Or it could be that they were coming from a firm and a lot of their clients followed them, or they had a very particular expertise and were already really well connected in the industry. So it really depends, I think. But probably about a year in is probably when I found my groove a little bit. And I think it just continues to grow. And it is tough because you don't necessarily always know. Like, it's always scary saying, no, I can't take on more clients right now, because, the fear is always, well, then no one's going to come knocking ever again. But in my experience, every time that I've taken that step, even though it feels very scary, it has always worked out, because I've been able to make sure that I take care of the clients that I do have and foster those relationships and, sort of clear out the backlog and sort of start afresh. And that's really worked for me, other than just sort of continuously grinding out to the point of burnout and sort of feeling like you're failing in all aspects.
Super. Thank you so much, Erin.
No problem.
Thank you. Piper, now I would like to ask you a question in particular about how you knew it was time to retire your license. And I'd love to know what advice you have for lawyers who are grappling with the question of whether or not to do the same.
Definitely. Something that my therapist said to me in one of my very first therapy sessions with her, we're coming up on 3 years together. And she said to me, Piper, you're not in touch with your inner knowing. You really need to trust your inner knowing. And I remember leaving that first or second therapy session thinking, this therapist is not for me. This is just a little too woo-woo for me. This isn't going to work. But almost 3 years later, here we are. So I really think it came down to getting to know my inner knowing. As trivial as that might sound, I really had to trust myself and trust what I knew about myself. And I think for me, and this is something that I'm just getting used to speaking about publicly now or openly now, because it was not something I could speak about openly when I was practicing. And so I'm curious, if I listen back to this podcast in a year from now, I might, like a year from now, be using different words to describe it. And I might be so embarrassed by what I'm about to say, but that's all part of growing and learning. I think that, I woke up every day and I was doing work that I believed in and work that I was proud of at an organization that was, really doing great work for the communities we served. But I was not great at my job and it didn't use my best skills. And I woke up every day not liking it and not feeling like I was good at my job. And that is a really crappy feeling to wake up feeling every day. And I would hear my Outlook swoosh and I would get sick to my stomach. Like legitimately, I would feel sick to my stomach if my Outlook swooshed. Sometimes like my eyes would like well with tears with anxiety of what could be coming in by email. And if you've ever felt that way, you know that it is like all consuming, and it impacted all of my relationships in maybe ways that I didn't notice at the time, but like I couldn't be my best self when I was practicing law because it felt so wrong. Like it felt like I was in the wrong place and it felt like I was always doing the wrong thing. And, I had really tried. Like I said, in law school, I knew that this probably wasn't for me. And so in my last semester of law school, I did an externship program in-house. And then I articled at a mid-sized full-service firm and did rotations. And then I worked in-house again at this organization doing human rights law, the type of work I thought that would really align. And I really, I tried to try so many different things to just think to myself, oh, you haven't found the right thing yet. But the truth of the matter was that it's not that I hadn't found the right area of law or the right legal environment. It's that I was doing the thing that wasn't right for me, which was practicing law. And I know that without a shadow of a doubt. Like there is literally not an ounce of doubt in my brain or my body that I have made a mistake by retiring my license. And a question I got all the time and truthfully continue to get, I hope it stops at some point, and I know it's well-meaning, but a question I got all the time and continue to get when I switched careers, so to speak, and retired my license to practice law quite young and quite early in my career was, will you ever go back to practicing law? And my answer is without a doubt, absolutely not. Like I have worked customer service jobs in the past. I worked in policy and politics and all these things. And like, I would far rather, I worked at Coach, the handbag store for many years, including after my call to the bar. And I would rather be selling handbags at Coach than go back to practicing law. And that's not meant with any disrespect or disparity between what those two roles mean. It means like I literally would be happier in that type of role. And so my point being is you really have to know yourself. And that's a process. Like we're all a work in progress. And I don't claim to know my full self the best I can quite yet. But I did know that part of myself really well, that I was in the wrong profession for me. And now I just feel much more aligned in the work that I do. And I wake up every day so happy. No job is perfect, but I wake up every day knowing like, this is the right type of role for me. And to be completely frank, I'm really damn good at my job. And I could never say that before when I was practicing law. And it's just a complete switch of the feelings that I was feeling before.
Absolutely. I love that so much, Piper. And I have another question for you, which is you talked about this moment 3 years ago, right? Where your therapist said, something about getting to know your inner knowing. And the question I have for you is between that moment and the moment that you made the decision, what was it? Are you able to pinpoint a particular moment in time where you were like, okay, now I know it's time?
So I think, I stopped practicing law when I did because of this opportunity at the University of Calgary. So that was just the alignment of the timeline. But for me, I think it was a process of shedding others' expectations of me or what I perceived others' expectations of me to be. And also trusting and coming to trust that, like, frankly, I know myself better than anyone. And everybody knows themselves better than anyone. And, in my role as an advisor and a coach, people ask me questions all the time. And I had two people, one in my LinkedIn DMs and one on a call earlier today, ask me to help them make a decision. And my answer is always, I can't make that decision for you because you know yourself better than I could ever know you. And so my best advice is reaching that point where you trust yourself more than you trust the opinions or the noise around you is what really helped me make this decision.
I love that, Piper. And I think that's so relatable and so key, that idea of, and I love how you put it, trusting yourself more than you trust the opinion of others. I just really love that. Erin, over to you. I love, by the way, having the two of you here. For the benefit of the listeners, I get to see Erin and Piper on my Zoom screen. It is absolutely amazing. A lot of lawyers that I've spoken with have reservations about going off on their own because they're concerned about what it's going to be like to be that sole practitioner, even sometimes going into a role where they're the only lawyer, for example, if they're working in-house. And so the question that I have for you is, how do you create community and professional support as a sole practitioner?
Yeah. And honestly, I think podcasting has been one of the best things that I have done. It has helped me so much with meeting individuals like yourself and making me feel a little less alone. I absolutely love listening to your podcast on my little walks.
Thank you. And right back at you.
I absolutely love it. I watched the listened to the procrastination episode, and it was just so helpful because I don't have that sounding board. I don't have someone, that I can walk over to and say in the lunchroom, like, oh my gosh, I've really been struggling to get this assignment done, or this file's giving me trouble, and have that organic conversation that kind of jolts you out of that stuckness that you have. I don't know what to describe.
You're describing it perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, having the ability to connect with people through the podcast, to be exposed to different podcasts, it makes you feel less alone, even though you are just walking alone with AirPods in. You are technically alone, and you are alone when you're a solo practitioner, but finding these opportunities have been so helpful. And I truly don't think that I have been that alone. I have such great support. Piper has been an amazing support. I have amazing family support. And, one of the things I used to think about when I was articling is it was very draining working in an office all day. And those are the people that you spend the most time with. And I felt like I ran my social battery while I was at work, to the point that when I would come home in the evenings and the weekends, that I would have no social battery left to give to anyone. Whereas now, because I work from home and I work from wherever I am, I truly feel like I have a bit more of myself to give in other parts of my life, if that makes sense. It gives me the ability to schedule my own schedule, to say, you know what, I actually don't want to take a hearing this Tuesday. I'd actually really enjoy a sleep in and a walk with my dog. And although that's not necessarily creating that same sense of community that you would get from, making sure that you're in the office every single day, it's creating a different sense of community, and it's creating a life that revolves around the things that you really enjoy. It's definitely different. There are some times where I was in an office the other day for a conference, and, the receptionist was so lovely, and they had a nice espresso machine. And I thought, wow, what am I doing? This is nice. They had a beautiful view of the harbor. I was like, man, what am I doing? This is stunning. This would be lovely to come into work to every day and, have this built-in community. But at the end of the day, going solo just really means carving out your own community, carving out your own space. And I think doing things like the podcast, carving out time to spend with your family and your friends and your community in more ways than just the legal community has been super, super beneficial to me. And it's definitely different, but I really do enjoy it.
I love that, Erin. And I really resonate with the idea of being intentional and creating your own community. I agree. Having a podcast is a fabulous way to be able to meet people that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily have the opportunity to meet. And I think when you are practicing on your own, there is that additional need if you want to have community around you to go out and create that community. So I just love what you said. And yes, sometimes you step into a beautiful office tower and think, oh, this could be a daily thing. And I think what's so great about your answer as well is that it's a matter of perspective, right? It's a question of what community means for you and what you trade in exchange for different types of community. And by the way, while you were talking, nobody can see us, but there's like a halo around your head. You look like an angel as you were speaking. It's really lovely.
Oh, I love it.
Piper, over to you. So you have this incredible business that you have created, this bar coaching program. And a lot of lawyers that I speak with have this entrepreneurial spirit. There's something that's calling to them and they're thinking about, do I do this? Do I not do this? And I would love to know what advice you have for any lawyers who are out there who have an entrepreneurial appetite.
Definitely. So I must admit, Paula, I did not wake up with this entrepreneurial appetite. I always say, it happened by accident. Failing the 2 bar exams and rewriting them while I was articling absolutely contributed to one of the worst years and seasons of my life. And I had felt so much shame that 3 days after I found out I passed, I had published my first ever blog post, literally registered the domain name, like the Squarespace website, with the purpose of publishing this blog post I had written. And it was to really rid myself of the shame that I felt from failing the bar exams and kind of serve as an explanation to people when I had sort of retreated from society. I had felt why I had done that. And the blog post really unintentionally took off. And the next thing I knew, I was getting all of these LinkedIn messages and Twitter DMs and emails and all the things from people wanting to know how I passed and what I did. And at the time, I had just moved back to Winnipeg. I shared the blog post about 10 days before I was officially called to the bar. I think on the day I shared the blog post, it was the first day I started working at a spin studio. So I was not technically unemployed, but I was working part-time at a spin studio. And I was talking to people who would reach out to me on social media or via email. And I, was having all these conversations and very lengthy conversations. And I was living at home for a very brief period of time. When I moved back to Winnipeg, I sort of was somewhat directionless and not really sure what was coming next. And for the first time in 8 years, I was living at home. And my dad is an entrepreneur. And I was sitting in an area of the house where I was taking these calls. And he came in to the room one day after I was done with some calls. And all he said to me was, "This ends today." And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "This ends today. This is a business, no more free calls." And then he left the room. And I just remember sitting there thinking oh, what a weird comment. There's no way. And then I have ADHD and I didn't know that at the time, but I do. And so I stayed up until 4 a.m. and I made a website from scratch. And the website was literally done other than the photos by 4 a.m. And to date, I've barely changed a thing. The website, if you go to my website, most of it was done in that 4 a.m. haze. And so it really was an accident. And when I launched my official website into the world, I truly did not know what to expect. Like I said, I was working part-time. I didn't know what was going to happen. And if you had told me 3 years ago, I feel like this is a theme of our Erin and my stories, but if you had told me 3 years ago that my business would be where it is today, I truly would not have believed you. I've worked with over 400 licensing candidates, and that doesn't include the students from Toronto Metropolitan University's graduating class. That's another 161 students. And it's just been so rewarding. And I've learned so much about growing a business and running a business along the way. And what I would say to anyone who feels like they have this entrepreneurial spirit, the best advice I could really give, and I'm going to misquote her, and I'm upset about it, and I don't have the quote handy, but we had a guest on our podcast about a year ago named Ashley Sire, and she said something about, and it's really stuck with me, and I wish I could quote it directly, but she said something along the lines of if you take the leap and you put something out into the world, there will be a net. And so I think one of the best things you can do is just put it out into the world. Don't be afraid to, put yourself out there, and for fear of being too cringy or for it to be too scary. just do it, because you never know what will happen. And I know that's way easier said than done. But if I had never just like taken the leap and not really cared what people thought about me doing that, I would have never had this wonderful experience of growing my business. So the best advice I could be would just like bet on yourself. And I've seen Erin bet on herself time and time again in running her firm. The reason that Erin has a successful law firm and is a sole practitioner, and as she sort of alluded to earlier, but I'm going to say it much more frankly because she's my friend and it's easier to speak about your friend than it is yourself. Like Erin didn't have connections. Erin started like as articling student to sole practitioner, and she had like nobody to send her clients or help her build her business. And that's not to say that like people who go out on their own much later in their career, like are doing any less of a good job or is any less impressive, but it was just a very different situation for Erin than people who start solo practices later in their career. And the reason Erin's business is still thriving is because she wakes up every day and continues to like bet on herself and bet that it's going to work out. And sometimes that's just what you need to do.
Okay, I love that so much. Piper, when you said the words, "this ends today," literally I had goosebumps. And then you tell the whole story about how you built the website overnight, and that just became more goosebumps. It's incredible. It's such a great story and so inspiring for people out there who have an idea where maybe for them it's this ends today. It's taking that idea and running with it. And love the shout out to Erin. I think your friendship is amazing. I don't know that we'll have time to explore it as much as I wish that we had time to explore it in today's episode. That might be a whole other episode. But I think I read on your website that you met on a train ride and it was like 4 hours. And I thought, oh, there are tracks and trains and what is going on here? And so just love that you're so supportive of each other and that you've been able to witness each other through so many different stages. So love, love, love. Thank you. And Ashley Sire is amazing. She was also on my podcast probably about a year ago talking about going solo with Amy Group. So big shout out to Ashley. We'll have to ask her if she wants to listen to this conversation. Erin, over to you. Talking about the podcast, what inspired you and Piper to start the podcast, and how did you decide on the name Off the Tracks?
Yeah, I think you were really just touching on it there. And yes, again, thank you, Piper. I was tearing up. It was so sweet. She's always there to pump me up. So I really appreciate it. But yeah, we went to law school together, all of law school. And we kind of, crossed paths. We weren't in the same section. We didn't take the same courses, sort of passed each other in the hallway, saw each other at parties. We're always friendly. It's not like I was like, oh, I hate that girl. But, we were always friendly. We just weren't friends yet until we started working for pro bono together. And we were on the train from Windsor to Toronto to go to our training just at the end of second year. So again, we were pretty much strangers, like beyond chit chat in the hallways. And we started talking about our lives on this 4-hour train. And there was not another single soul in that train part. And so we just went deep. Like we were just like, here is everything that has happened to me in my life. And then she was like, oh my God, here's everything that's happened to me in my life. And we had the most amazing Via Rail guy that kept coming, filling up my coffee. He was just laughing it up with us. Like he was the sweetest soul. And I just have such fond memories of that train ride. And it was just that train ride that sort of sparked our friendship. And, obviously at the time we didn't know we were going to start a podcast called Off the Tracks. But years go by, we finished, third year, the bar exam, articling. We stayed in touch throughout all of that, and flash to the summer after articling. And we were just sort of talking through the challenges of becoming a freshly minted lawyer and, life in the midst of the pandemic and coming off the heels of a crap ton of law student debt and having to pay more LSO fees every 2 days. And we just kept having these conversations, and we were thinking, we cannot be the only ones that are feeling this way. We can't be the only ones that think this way. We should really start a podcast. And then we kind of, we took a little online webinar, as one did in the midst of the pandemic. And we kind of shelved it for a little bit because life got busier, life was becoming a bit more normal in the summer, and we were trying to soak that in. But then eventually we came back to the idea of, starting a podcast and what would that look like. And I'm so glad that we did. And we settled on the name Off the Tracks because of our friendship that bloomed on the tracks and how our friendship evolved off of the tracks at that point, but also that we both didn't want that traditional law firm life. We didn't want a 9 to 5 working up to partner status lifestyle. And we really wanted to know what other options there were for people like us that were interested in a variety of different things. Like, we had gotten to do so much interesting work through Pro Bono Students Canada. And I think I may have accidentally called it Pro Bono Ontario, but I don't know if I did. Anyways, it was Pro Bono Students Canada. And we decided, when you're in law school, it's very much this one track mind. Like, you get into school and you just, the second I had never heard of Bay Street before. Like, obviously I knew it was a street in Toronto, but I had no idea what Bay Street meant. I didn't know it was like a Wall Street, Toronto vibes. And then when you get to law school, it's like the only thing. Like, by end of first year, you're just like indoctrinated that you need a job on Bay Street in order to be smart and capable, and the only way to pay off your student loans and, do anything with your life. And so it's really a one track, that or clerkship or partner track or really traditional style of practicing law. And we knew that just was not for us. And so we wanted to know what would it be like to go off of that track. And so that's how we landed on the Off the Tracks podcast, both from our budding friendship and from our desire to do alternative. I don't even like calling it an alternative because it sounds like it's an alternative because of law school. But I think one of our guests also made us rethink the way you frame that, because it's like, it's not the alternative if a lot of people are doing it. So that's a little background on Off the Tracks.
I love that. And I'm nodding my head because absolutely alternative, which is the alternative, really? I love that, Erin. And I'm just looking at the time and I'm mindful of your time. So I've got another question for Piper and then a couple of shorter questions before we wrap up, because I really could, if you had the time, I would like to stay here all day. But Piper, what have you learned about lawyers and what it means to go off the tracks?
Definitely. So I think what I've learned about lawyers and what it means to go off the tracks is that there is no one size fits all approach to life when you graduate with a law degree. And really, there are so many possibilities out there. It's just a matter of finding what aligns with you and finding where your best skills are and finding what's going to support you in the ways that you need to be supported as you move throughout your life and career. And that's really the crux of it.
Beautiful. Erin, question for you. To anybody who is listening, who is on the fence over whether to stay on the track, whatever that track looks like for them, or to go off the track, what advice would you give them?
Oh, that's a tough one.
I know, and it's a surprise question.
It is.
Sorry to throw it at you.
No, it's good.
Piper has the advantage because it's coming to you next, Piper.
No, and it's really good. I mean, I would have never imagined that I would do something like this. Like, my parents were absolutely floored when I said I was going to do this. And not because they didn't want me to, but because I am very anxious. I'm a very anxious person. I like to know exactly what is going to happen. I love to plan, love my organizer, love to know what's happening next. And running my own firm, as Piper really well put, it really means betting on myself every single morning and having some faith and some trust and letting go of that control. And that's tough, especially for us lawyers who like to know, I'm going to make this much and, I'm going to have this plan and by this time I'll be doing this. And so it requires a little bit of trust and letting go. But I almost find that more liberating than the certainty of something that is not fulfilling me. And I have, had opportunities to potentially take jobs here and there. And while they would provide more financial security in the sense that you get a paycheck every 2 weeks or every month, whatever it is, there's just some things that you just can't account for when running your own firm, and the magic that happens and the connections that happen and all of the unsuspecting good things that come your way when you are doing something that you feel really fulfilled in. And if you're on the fence about it and you're not fulfilled or happy where you are, obviously there's always the grass is greener on the other side syndrome. But if you are truly unhappy where you are and just have a little glimmer of hope, I would just, as you said, just jump and have that faith, because there will never be a time when you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can go on my own now because I know I'm going to make this much money and everything's going to be okay, because you don't know that for sure. You have to just let go and have faith in yourself that everything's going to work out. And you know what? At the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, you can always take another job. There will always be something else for you. There will always be another opportunity. So just have some faith in yourself and put a bet on yourself.
So well put, Erin. Thank you so much. And for anyone who wants to find you, where would they go?
That is a great question. What is my handle? I think it's Erin O'Rourke Law on Instagram, and on Twitter, I think I'm EF O'Rourke, but yes, I am. Okay, good job. Thank you, Piper, my assistant there. I'm pretty sure I've changed it a few times because I used to always have like weird, quirky nicknames for myself. But yeah, EF O'Rourke on Twitter, Erin O'Rourke Law online or on Facebook or Instagram, and always happy to connect and talk to others who are interested in doing the same thing.
Amazing. And we'll put the links along with the episode in the show notes, along with the link to Off the Tracks podcast. Piper, same question to you. If for any of our listeners who are, like I sort of described before, they're on the fence, they're on the tracks, they're thinking about going off the tracks, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think I'll echo a little bit of what Erin was touching on. And something I've learned is life is too short to be unhappy, especially in as big of an area of your life as your career. And, I can talk about all of this until I'm blue in the face. The fact of the matter is, I was lucky that I found alignment and purpose and skill in a law adjacent career. Like, I still very much am deeply intertwined in the legal profession, in the work that I do, both in my business and in my day job. But the fact of the matter is that might not be the case for everyone when they go off the tracks. They might go off the tracks in a completely different direction. And that's okay too. And I think, the skills that we learn as lawyers and the critical thinking skills, the problem solving skills that we learn in law school and throughout practice and articling, those can carry you into so many other career paths and other dreams. And I think my best advice would just be, like I said earlier, to trust yourself and know yourself, and trust that it might be challenging to go off the tracks in whatever capacity that looks like for you. And it will definitely be scary. I have felt so much of that fear, but it will be worth it, because even if the next thing that you do when you go off the tracks isn't the quote right thing or the perfect fit, it doesn't mean that won't come for you later. Sometimes you have to make a few steps before finding that, just right alignment. And that's okay too. So if the first thing you try doesn't fit perfectly, it doesn't mean that you've made the wrong decision. It just means that you have, one more step or two more steps to take to find what's going to work best for you.
Beautiful. I love it. Love it. Love it. Piper, thank you. Piper, for anyone who would like to find you, where do they go?
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Piper Riley Thompson. I love sharing different things on there about the legal profession and what off the tracks means and mental health and all the things. I try to be really transparent because I think our profession needs a lot more of that. You can also find my business, Ontario Bar Exam Coach, on LinkedIn or online. The handle is at Ontario Bar Exam Coach on Instagram or ontariobarexamcoach.com. And then you can find myself and Erin at offthetrackspodcast.com or at Off the Tracks Podcast on Instagram. And yeah, Paula, thank you so much for having us. This was such a treat. And it was also such a treat to meet you in person, very accidentally. I didn't expect it. And I walked into a room at a conference I was at 3 or 4 days ago and saw Paula sitting at the table I sat down at. And I went, Paula, Hi. It's so great to see you. It was so great to meet you a couple days ago. It's so great to be on the podcast. Thank you for having us. This has been such a treat. We so admire you and the off the tracks work that you do. And we couldn't be more grateful to have shared this conversation with you.
Likewise, Piper, and thank you, Erin. And Piper, it was amazing to meet in person. Erin, I'm sorry you weren't there because it was quite magical. And I think probably lots of us can relate to that experience that we're now having post-pandemic, where we have known people in 2D and, seen their beautiful faces, and to be at a conference where all of a sudden you're like, wow, Piper has arms and legs. Like, she's not just a 2D head that shows up on my Zoom screen. This is amazing. So it was quite wonderful to meet in person. And thank you both. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Piper, for joining me here today and for joining our listeners for today's podcast episode. I know I am really inspired. One of the themes that you've both touched on so beautifully is this idea of self-trust and betting on yourself. And you've given me so much to think about, and really, really grateful to have you here. And thank you again. And thank you for the work that you're doing. All the podcasting, all the posts on LinkedIn, just, I think, creating community, raising awareness, allowing people the forums to have conversations that need to be had. So thank you to both of you. It has been such a pleasure. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I know I enjoyed having it. So thank you, and look forward to joining everybody again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.